All right. All right. Okay, I guess we should be ready. Happy Friday. Good afternoon. We're at the meeting of Plant and Animal Advisory Committee, and I'm aware that I am between you and your well-deserved weekend. So let's see that we can get through our agenda in a timely fashion today. And I will call the meeting to order at 1:36 p.m. on Friday, the 28th of October, 2022. And let's start with brief introductions, because one of the members I don't know yet, have met yet. So I'll start out. Welcome, I'm Helmut Rock. I'm the administrator with Plant Industry Division with Hawaii Department of Agriculture, and I'm the chair. So I'll go with my screen. Maybe Rob on my left, you go next, please, and introduce yourself and tell who you're with.
Sure, I'm Rob Hoff with the Department of Land and Natural Resources, and I am alone in my cubicle, if that matters.
Thank you, Maria. You're
Aloha,
next.
I'm Maria Haas. I'm with the Pacific Aquaculture and Coastal Resources Center at UH Hilo. I may occasionally have people coming into my office, but there's no one else with me otherwise.
Okay. Sam, you're
Aloha,
up.
everybody. I'm Sam Ohugan. I'm the Senior Scientist and Technical Advisor for the Chicken Province.
Tom, you're next.
I'm Tom Eisen. I'm a planner with the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development, sitting in for the director, Mary Alice Evans, who's not able to make it today. Thank you.
So we're having some feedback. Jody, is that you? Because you're the only one. Try to, okay, that's better. That's better. All right, Grace, you're up next.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Grace Simmons, representing the Department of Health. I was formerly the program manager for the Vector Control Branch. I'm now the program manager for the Hazard Evaluation and Emergency Response, but still representing the director in the Department of Health. Thank you. And I'm alone here.
Thank you, Grace. And Ryan, you're up next.
Aloha, everyone. My name is Ryan Pe'a. I'm a fish and wildlife biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Thank you, Ryan. And Jody, you're last but not least. You're muted, sorry. You're muted.
Hi, Jody Yee with the Attorney General's Office. And I think there's one more, Tara Yamashita, too. I'm alone in my office. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Next on, I guess you got all the agenda. It's in the chat. So next up, we have 2 minutes, or yeah, 2 minutes for the last 2 meetings to approve. And I'm sure you all read and reviewed the minutes. So let's go with the first minute from May the 20th, 2022. Are there any comments to the minute?
I have a brief comment. I was not present for that one because I was recently put on, and so I will recuse from any action on this, any vote on this minute.
Thank you, Sam. Any comments to the minutes? All right. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented from the Advisory Committee on Plants and Animals, May 20th, 2022 meeting?
Yeah, I move we approve the minutes from May 20th.
Rob is moving. Who is seconding? Tom, second. Let's call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 So, and I from the chair. So we got 2, 4, 6 yes votes and 1 absent or abstaining vote from Sam. The motion carries. That was number 1 meeting. The second one are the minutes of the Advisory Committee on Plants and Animals on June the 9th, 2022. Any comments, discussion on that minute?
If not, then I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Sam. Any second?
I second.
Grace is second. All in favor, say aye.
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 And chair says aye. Unanimously. Vote passes the motion. All right. Minutes are done. Thank you for that. So next up is our, so we'll have to ask if there's any comments from the general public on the agenda items as presented. We have 3 requests on the 1 item on the entomology. Are there any comments from the general public that Jason, Kevin, you can see? Any hands raised?
I see no hands raised.
Thank you. Any comments on the agenda from our members? All right, I don't.
Well, I'll just comment that this is very timely, and I know that a lot of the folks in the coffee industry are excited about having another tool to deal with this pest.
Thank you, Sam. All right. So we have received earlier this morning, you should have that, sent from Jonathan, 2 comments in our testimonies in writing that we have received. 1, however, was received after the deadline, which was from Kona Coffee Farms Association. Both of these comments, you should have them in your email, are in support of the petition in front of us. The one that came in on time was from the Hawaii Coffee Association, from Chris Manfredi, the executive director. You have the testimony, and we might get to it then when we discuss the items in particular. All right. So no comments on the agenda items, then we can probably move straight into the petition, and I will call forward Kevin or Jason, whoever has the power to do so, Chris Kishimoto, to present the petition to the members of the committee.
Hi, Chris. State your name and affiliation for the record.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Rog, members of the Plant and Animal Committee. My name is Chris Kishimoto. I'm with the Hawaii Department of Agriculture's Plant Quarantine Branch. And I'm here this afternoon to present a request to number 1, allow the importation and possession of lab-reared strains of the parasitoid wasp Phymastachys coffea, an insect on the list of restricted animals Part A, by permit for field release and to control the coffee berry borer, Hypothenemus hampii, by the United States Department of Agriculture's Agriculture Research Service and the University of Hawaii at Manoa. 2, to establish permit conditions for the import and possession and field release of lab-reared strains of the parasitoid wasp Phimastachys coffea to control coffee berry borer by USDA ARS and UH Manoa. And number 3, to determine the probable impact to the environment if lab-reared strains of Phimastachys are accidentally released. The commodity in this case is going to be multiple shipments of lab-reared strains of Phimastachys coffea. And the shippers are going to be Pablo Benavides from Senecafe in Colombia and Jose Carlos Rele Rodriguez from the University of Puerto Rico. The importers are going to be both of the applicants, Dr. Peter Follett from the United States Department of Agriculture's Agriculture Research Services United States Pacific Basin Research Center located in Hilo, Hawaii, and Mark Wright from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Phimastachys coffea is currently on HDOA's list of restricted animals, Part A. Chapter 4-71 Hawaii Administrative Rules allows import of animals on this list for research by universities or government agencies, among other reasons. Phimastachys coffea will be used to control the coffee berry borer, which is currently a serious invasive pest of coffee in Hawaii. Phimastachys was obtained, as I mentioned before, from Senecafe in Colombia under USDA permit and brought into a fully certified quarantine insect containment facility managed by the USDA's Forest Service at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park in Volcano, Hawaii for host specificity testing. For safeguarding facilities and practices, Phimastachys will be imported as larvae or pupae infesting coffee berry borer adult beetles. At Senecafe, parchment coffee used to rear the coffee berry borers that will be parasitized will be immersed in fungicides for a period of 12 to 15 hours to kill any potential fungal pathogens. Adult CBB will be disinfected with a 3% solution of benzalkonium chloride, which acts as a disinfectant, surfactant, bactericide, and inhibitor of viral activity. To help separate out the parasitized CBB, the beetles will be exposed to an artificial light source for 15 hours at a temperature of 28 degrees Celsius or approximately 82 degrees Fahrenheit at 75 to 80% relative humidity so that the live coffee berry borers can fly right to the light while only the motionless parasitized beetles will remain. A portion of the parasitized CBB will also be looked at under a microscope to eliminate any unparasitized dead CBB and other irregularities to ensure quality control. Currently, there are no known hyperparasitoids of Phimastachys in Colombia, and no coffee plants or plant material will be shipped to Hawaii. Phimastachys was chosen as the best candidate parasitoid in Hawaii because of its previously reported high host specificity and ability to significantly reduce and regulate coffee berry borer populations in the field. Using no choice host tests, a total of 43 different species of Coleoptera were tested. Phimastachys is only able to parasitize the target host, which is coffee berry borer, and 4 other introduced species of Hypothenemus. There are no native Hawaiian species in the genus Hypothenemus. And the researchers indicate that Phimastachys appears to be host specific at the genus level, meaning they're only able to survive on species which are closely related to coffee berry borer and would not parasitize other beetle species released for other biocontrol projects by the Hawaii Department of Agriculture. So for the analysis and application of an EA, the EA requirement is triggered under certain circumstances, including when an applicant proposes an action on state or county lands that requires agency approval or is using state or county funding and is not specifically exempted under Chapter 343 Hawaii Revised Statutes. This appears to be the case here. The applicant's request in this instance involves import and possession of Phimastachys for field release as biocontrol of coffee berry borer into the environment. This request was submitted to the Advisory Subcommittee on Entomology for its review and recommendation. The Advisory Subcommittee recommendations and comments are as well, their recommendations are as follows. For the first one, on whether or not to recommend approval or disapproval to allow the import of lab-reared strains of the parasitoid wasp Phimasticus coffea for field release to control coffee berry borer. 3 out of the 4 members recommended approval. For the second request of whether or not to recommend approval to establish permit conditions for the import of lab-reared strains of Phimasticus for field release by USDA and UH Manoa, 3 out of the 4 members recommended approval to establish permit conditions. And for the last request on whether if lab-reared strains of Phimasticus were accidentally released, what would the probable impact be to the environment? 3 out of the 4 members felt that there would be minimal or no significant impact to the environment. That's all for the request. But I think it's I have to bring up that I guess while I was talking to the researchers, one of the applicants did not want to go through the EA process, citing that they will not be using state or county lands, funding, employees, or supplies and equipment, while the other has elected to go through the environmental review process. That's just, I guess, as a courtesy for you guys. I guess the decision not to undergo the environmental review process would represent some challenges, I guess, for this particular request. That's about all I have for now.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any questions for Chris or the petitioners? Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, just to start out with Chris, I had a couple of questions. First of all, I was surprised that it's already on the list and was curious how it got on the restricted list.
I think this was something that was looked at a long time ago. It was put on this list probably over 10 years ago because it was already on the list by the time I started into this position. So I believe there has been a good hard look at this particular species being imported already.
Okay, so that was just Department of Ag being proactive, anticipating the need for this import and going through the listing process in advance?
Yeah, I believe so.
Oh, great work. That's great. We should do that more often, I think. The other question.
We'll take the credit for that, Rob. Thank you.
The other question was regarding, I think they might have been replies to Frank Holwer's comments. I'm not sure where they were exactly, but the applicants talked about needing to do additional mass rearing outside Hawaii and importing by mass insects for augmentative release. Is this permit going to cover that, or would that, or is this permit strictly? It did say multiple. I just want to know what this permit's covering and whether it includes like the mass import.
I think when they were talking about mass import and stuff, I think they were talking about sometime into the future. I think there was some discussions that even included rearing CBB on artificial diet and stuff like that, in order to even lessen the risk of it bringing in other pathogens or diseases or other things. But I think this permit basically will just cover initial imports and releases. The numbers, I think the initial numbers of CBB may not be as high as, say, in the future when they're able to mass produce these.
Right. And do we need to therefore define a quantity of what's being imported, just so it's clear that we're not approving mass import today? Just.
I think that's something that actually the committee can decide. We can ask the applicants how much they intend to bring in, but I think for the plant quarantine branch, it seems to satisfy I guess their safeguarding practices, their disinfection practices are pretty satisfactory. And, I think plant quarantine is okay with them bringing in, as much as they like, as long as they apply those practices to everything that they do import.
Okay, and then finally, at the beginning of the application, it includes an institution in Puerto Rico as a source for the insects, but then the application goes on to only reference Sena Cafe. So are the insects going to come from both facilities? And if so, then I have a question to the applicants of, why they're using two facilities versus one.
That I'm not positive on. You may have to ask the applicants that, but my understanding is they were only going to bring in stuff from Colombia.
Yeah, that's what I thought too in the application. So I was just curious why the Puerto Rico lab was listed.
Yeah, it says shippers 1, Sena Cafe, and shipper 2 is the University of Puerto Rico, right? That's what you're referring to, Ron?
Exactly.
And just going back, and we can post that to our petitioners if they're on. Just referring to, because they're coming in, but they're going into the quarantine facility according to number 7, condition 7, for a minimum of 2 generations. So I understand when we had that discussion prior to this, the idea is at one point then maybe get them imported straight from Sena Cafe directly into the field. That is not the case with this petition, right, Chris?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Shall we? Any other question? Oh, Kevin.
Chairman Rog, we have Darcy. Darcy, could you state your name and affiliation for the record?
Darcy Oishi, Hawaii Department of Agriculture, Plant Pest Control Branch Acting Manager. I wanted to address Committee Member Hoff's question about the listing of Phimastocus. It was listed over 20 years ago for potential biocontrol agent of tropical nut borer, which affects macadamia. And that was actually petitioned by the university. I do not think permit conditions were ever established for its import, though.
It was just put on the list, but then that was it.
Yeah.
Okay. Jason or Kevin, do you see any of the petitioners that
We
have
have,
hands up
we
to
have
respond?
Sam. We have Sam. Who would like to speak?
Okay, Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, the hand against the forest was hard to see. For the record, let's see who was talking. Chris. For the record, Chris, since it was 3 out of 4 rather than unanimous, could you state any of the reasons why one of the 4 did not, chose not to approve?
I mean, pretty much the reasons are in the submittal itself. I think the reviewer had some issues with how the applicants were doing things, maybe how many replications they might have done, things of that nature. I think there was also, he also had a concern about cost to benefit analysis. There may have been concerns about the biology of the parasitoid, and how effective that of a biocontrol agent that might have been.
Okay, thanks. I mean, considering the history of the use of this elsewhere, it suggests to me that it has potential for control purposes. I was a little bit curious about whether or not anyone had considered our endemic scolited beetles and any potential testing against those?
Yeah, so the researchers did select multiple native beetle species and this biocontrol agent is not supposed to be able to attack any of those.
Mm-hmm. You were saying that it tends to be genus specific within the family, but then I was wondering whether or not any within the family or within the tribe that we have that are endemic, that would be, a very cautious approach. So were those close relatives included in that test?
I think for me, like close might be a relative term, but I think, they use some that were much closer than others. As noted, there's no native Hypothenemus species to Hawaii. There are some native Xyloborus species, which might be kind of closely related, but their research has found that it did not attack any of those species.
Okay, good. That's what I wanted to hear on the record, and that's great.
And Tom, now you're gone. Sorry. Go ahead, Tom.
Yes, something that Chris mentioned about the EA process caught my attention. I mean, there's maybe many questions or comments I could go into about that notion, and this may or may not be the time for it, but in particular, when you said that one of the applicants said they wanted to go through the EA process and another didn't, are there two separate applications we're dealing with? I had a sense that there was one application with like two applicants as part of it, but ultimately the decision has to be made whether the one action goes through the process, not, half of it doesn't, half of it doesn't. It can't be parsed down that small. So that was one just question I wanted resolved, just that there was in fact one request, one action in the world of Chapter 343 here.
I would agree with you. I think it should be decided whether or not they will go through the state's environmental review process. Not doing so means that they will not be using any state or county, lands, funds, employees, equipment, facilities, or anything like that. And I do think that would hamper this project and further delay.
Isn't one of the applicants?
That would be up to the applicants, I guess, to really decide.
Right, and then the nature of the, I will call them the proponents, because in the world of 343, applicants mean something very specific, which this may not be, but if the entity applying for a permit is a state or county agency, then it's considered an agency action, and that agency makes the determinations. If it is all non-state or county agencies that are seeking the approval and proposing the project, then some state or county agency has to be considered the approving agency, and I'm guessing that would be Department of Agriculture. But so who's making these decisions is going to come out very quickly when it's defined, and in my mind, it needs to be defined more clearer who is actually proposing the project, because that determines who gets to make these judgment calls.
Tom, I think it's a good time to talk about this, because obviously when we looked at that, we have the same questions here. EA to be or not to be, kind of. Because we had that issue, as you remember, painfully with other recent petitions. And so I checked with our AG, Jody, and she reminded me, of course, that we're merely advising. The decision obviously is our State Ag Board making it. And as you recall, in the recent meetings, EA was an important topic of discussions at the board meetings for some of these petitions. So I think it's a legitimate question here for us as well. What are we going to do with number 3 of the petition? Determine the probable impact to the environment if lab-reared strains of the parasitoid wasp are accidentally released. Can we make the recommendation? Can we vote on it? What are we going to recommend to the board? So I think, not sure if the petitioners have an answer, because it seemed like, Chris, you said they're going, I mean, there's kind of, it almost sounds like contradiction. Yes, no. So we have to make that, I think, when we go through these items, we have to hear that, or we have to write this in our recommendation to the board. Right?
Certainly having, if there already was an EA completed, and it certainly seems like that's not the case, then it should very clearly be analyzed in that EA, this exact question. That's, one of the biggest elements, really the big question of it. And without an EA being done and without that analysis being done, it's very difficult to make the decision on it, will it have a significant impact or not? And that's really why the EA is being prepared. And so given that it's still at this preliminary point where we don't even know if one's going to be prepared, I think it's pretty difficult for our body, let alone the Department of Ag or the Board of Ag, to be making these decisions. This is exactly why there is an environmental review process that produces a vetted document to be used by the decision makers. So it certainly kind of begs the point that there should be at least an EA done, but until it's done, we're a bit in the dark as to be able to make that decision. Will it have a significant impact or not?
So, Tom, if I may speak up, I agree with you. This group, unless we went out and we did a global literature review of the biology of the species and previous releases or its utility elsewhere and its performance elsewhere and any potential impacts that were done, it wouldn't make too much sense for us to be making a recommendation on the potential impacts should it be released in Hawaii, since Hawaii is such, can be a unique place, or it could be extremely similar to other places in the world. So I'm not quite sure what we should do as this group on number 3. Has there been similar issues in the past for other potential permits and releases?
Yeah, what we've done in the past, when a FONSI hasn't been issued, we've gone ahead and made a recommendation to the Board of Agriculture. But typically, the Department of Agriculture's AG requires that the FONSI is issued before the board makes a decision, I think is the history I have experienced on this. And so I'm not sure where we are with not knowing whether EA is even going to be prepared. There is an EA attached to the application. It just hasn't been published as a draft yet, is my understanding. Is that right, Chris?
That is correct. That's actually something that the applicants, especially Peter Follett, was drafting and did send to USDA. I think as part of their requirements. It just was not, I guess it just wasn't published in the environmental review for, to satisfy Chapter 343 requirements. I will say if the applicants truly are not going to use any state or county, lands or funds or anything like that, then, there would not be a need for the EA process. But, because UH is on paper as being a collaborator, we do have some concerns.
And I might add, after reviewing that draft EA that was attached, it looked very detailed, a lot of effort went into it. To my eyes, it looked like it was prepared with the federal process in mind, which seems to be confirmed here. There's some rather stark omissions that would be necessary for it to be compliant with Chapter 343. One specifically, an analysis of significance. There are very specific significance criteria that are enumerated in the rules, and a core part of an EA is very much the analysis of these 13 significance criteria. That's something that's unique to Hawaii's process. It's not a part of the NEPA process. And so it looks like a NEPA practitioner prepared this, a lot of detail, but not addressing this one key issue, which is really the whole point of an EA, is to determine this notion of significance. And hopefully, I mean, if it's reasonable or legitimate, come up with a finding of no significant impact. But without an analysis of the significance criteria, all of that information is just like data. It's not being focused on the one real question that is up to the agency, whether that's UH if they're proposing it, or DOA if it's a private applicant that's proposing it, to make the determination of a FONSI, or maybe, God forbid, an EIS. But I just put this out there as guidance. You know, that's all that our office provides, guidance. We can't make any determinations. We see a whole lot of EAs and EISs go through, and we give advice on the system, but we certainly do not have the authority to make any of these determinations. So I merely put it out there as food for thought, maybe something the beetle can chew on.
Right. And so the wording of number 3, you know, to determine the probable impact is probably something that this group can't really do at this stage. The closest we come, Tom, would be for you. You know, I didn't have a chance to review that draft EA in much detail, but if you were familiar with the points of, you know, that would be run through for the state analysis, did it seem in your mind that this would easily fly through toward a FONSI, or would there be questions on some of those criteria that would make it more problematic?
Again, I didn't read it super closely, but it looked like the level of analysis was substantial. And if it was applied, and they ultimately answered their own version of the question, that on the federal level, it's like not a problem. So one might presume that a similar result would happen on the state level, but until it actually went through the process, it would be premature, you know, to speculate, or be speculative if that's the case. But it seems like there's a lot of detail to what was provided that could go towards the analysis saying that a FONSI was appropriate.
Maybe it might be fair to bring in the applicants as well, so we could get you know, their take.
I was hoping they had their hand raised, but I haven't heard anything back. Jason or Kevin?
We have, well, we had a few attendees, but it seems like they left. Mark, I believe Mark had his hand raised. So Mark, please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Mark Wright, University of Hawaii.
Go ahead, Mark.
Thanks. I'm not sure exactly what the question is. We are perfectly prepared to go through the EA process, but for the purpose of doing the actual importation, it was the understanding of everyone involved that it did not involve state funding, etc. It's all run, that side of it's all run by the ARS. We did submit a substantial amount of data showing that this importation would not have significant negative environmental impact. I mean, it's astounding to hear people say that we didn't. we did a lot of work on this. We looked very carefully at endemic species that are the closest related to the target species and so on. It's not a trivial effort that's been made. again, I'm perfectly prepared to submit an EA through the state process. The decision was through APHIS, who funded this, and ARS, that they wanted to move right ahead with the application and just get it done, and that we could do that later once we become involved in the project. I know it does look contradictory to have me listed as an applicant there, and I brought that up, and no one seems to be too stressed about that at the time, so I don't know what to say about that. If you have any specific questions about the impact assessment that we submitted, I'd be happy to address those.
So Mark, this is Helmut. I bring it up again. We, as the Plant and Animal Advisory Committee, cannot make a decision on this. We're, as I mentioned, merely an advisory committee. So we're giving recommendations to the board. The board is the ultimate institution that makes the decision. I'm speaking of my limited experience with some of those petitions that have gone in front of the board and that have caused issues for the approval by the board because of the EA situation. We had delays in the voting or a deferral to some of the decisions by the board because the EA was not finalized. So I want, as I said, I just want to make sure that this petition, once we have it in front of the board, has a success if we make that the recommendation to have a success with the board, because that question definitely will come up as we have seen over the last year. So that's why we bring it up. And
no, I understand. I mean, am I allowed to respond or not?
No, go ahead. Absolutely, Mark.
I certainly understand that. It's a very opaque process, to be perfectly honest. To know whether or not to do it is really kind of odd how to figure that out. Again, we're prepared to do it, and I've actually got it pretty much ready to go. And I get conflicting advice, perhaps, on whether it'll delay things or not. That's really hard to tell. And so I guess one of the main things that came up was, what if there was an accidental release of this parasitoid? Is that a big concern in this regard? Because we're going to make a purposeful release of this parasitoid, right? That's where this is going, is there will be purposeful releases. So I think that kind of moots the whole accidental release part. I mean, okay.
Yes.
The primary objective is to bring this thing into quarantine, run it through 2 generations and release it. I guess that refers to prior to 2 generations.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. Okay. Well, the predicted impacts.
And as you know, I mean, it's a procedural. It's a process, right, with the EA. And again, we've had issues, and Sam remembers that painful with and Grace as well, with mosquitoes. It is just to have every duck in the row. That's the point. You know, if there's an argument, yes or no, unfortunately, we have to have these check boxes. That's the whole point, because you're gonna have questions, you're gonna have reviews, you're gonna have all kinds of people looking at that, and if there's one piece missing, that could derail the whole petition. That's our concern here.
And I certainly brought it up as a point of process also, not to suggest that the action doesn't deserve to go through with flying colors, because a lot of work was done. I just was saying, kind of like maybe stating the obvious, that it certainly appeared that the process was not completed yet, but certain aspects of who makes the decision in the process, I was just bringing up these points. I mean, I guess, again, not to beg that, but if, Mark, you, and I'm presuming you're like speaking for UH when you are an element of UH as a proponent. And so if the decision is made, well, to the extent that you are proposing the project, the UH is proposing it, then it's hard to say that state funds are not involved. And it may get very, down to some minutia, whether that's actually true or not. But the presumption is if the University of Hawaii as a state agency is proposing something, then that has hit the trigger to go through the environmental review process.
If I may respond, the way that we interpreted that was the permit is to introduce the organism into quarantine and release it, which the ARS would do. The permit, to our understanding, had no bearing on the process of preparing the documents prior to that, and has no bearing on what happens after the organism is established in the state. That was our understanding.
Right. Well, just one of the core triggers is the use of state funds, and I guess
The line is very fine here.
yeah.
No, I don't want to get argumentative about it, but
Not at all. And it's not up for me to make. I'm just bringing
just
point
being
up.
an applicant versus conducting the work are different things, I think.
Yeah, and in the environmental review process, that determines, the answer to that question is who makes the determinations, the applicant, or if the applicant is not a state or county agency, then somebody else makes a decision. But if the applicant is a state or county agency, then that agency makes the decisions related to whether an environmental review is necessary. So it may not be UH's decision to make. It's kind of almost getting into a circular tailspin here.
Circular indeed, yep.
So I just bring these up, not here to derail anything. I just bring them up because probably the earlier that there was brought up and resolved, the better.
And that's the whole point here, Mark, as well. Yes, again, we're the advisory committee. So are there any other questions since Mark is on right now, for the petitioners directly from our members?
Helmut, we have Suzanne who would like to speak.
Go ahead, bring them forward as well.
Suzanne, please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Suzanne Schreiner. I am currently the president of the Kona Coffee Farmers Association, but at the time this draft EA was put together, I assisted Peter Follett in the typesetting of the application for the formal EA process. So my comment here, aside from my support letter, was that I'm sorry Peter's not here. I have an email from Peter from 2021 stated he uploaded the document to the DEA on September 20th to OEQC using their online form. Once again, that's September 20th, a year ago. I believe the EA was rejected because it came from ARS and it needed to have the stamp of the Department of Ag or another state agency to move forward. And this is really where this process got held up and why the DEA was never formalized into an EA, because we needed Department of Ag support to move forward. And Peter would be better able to document than I would. But my understanding at the time was the intent was to go through the full EA process. And Peter was not successful with that.
So Suzanne, I mean, Chris, you remember that discussion we had, right? Because we weren't the agency to do that.
Yeah, correct. To the best of my knowledge, I would think UH as a collaborator and a state agency might be the agency that would submit the draft EA for Peter Follett.
As I recall, from a year ago, it's hard. There's been many draft EAs that have come across my desk, but I vaguely do recall what Suzanne said. It came in and a response was generated to Peter exactly saying that this has to come in from a state or county agency, either as the proposing agency or approving agency. And certainly it seems like if UH becomes the proposing agency and they make the determination, the answer can be resolved. It's not stuck in this, he said, she said, or who's going to do first kind of a thing. If UH becomes a proposing agency, then they can determine if 343 applies or if not, or to run it through, but some state or county agency needs to step up.
If I may respond, am I still there?
Oh,
Yeah,
go
I'm
ahead,
prepared
Marcus,
to
go
do
ahead.
that. It's just very unclear how it works. I mean, I've got it all prepared, and I didn't know about these 13 points, but I'm fully prepared to do that.
Well, we certainly can provide guidance, in our role. Now, we're no longer the Office of Environmental Quality Control. We're part of the Office of Planning, but provide the same support and function. And I can provide information, I guess, offline, how to proceed.
Any other comments, questions?
Is there any way of moving this to the board so that it can be taken to the board once the EA, either the FONSI's been issued or they've made a determination that no state funds were used? Or are we saying that we need that done before we can make any recommendations today?
Good question, Rob. I would say, and then I'm looking at Jody here, even though she is in the hole here, in the black hole there. But we can make the recommendation. The question is then if the board will make the approval depending on that, because I remember when we had, it was part of it with some of the mosquitoes that we issued, the board approved it once the EIA has been completed and approved. So I think the board may be able to do that conditional approval. We're not making approval, we just make a recommendation to the board. So we can say, yes, we recommend it because the applicants said they will prepare the EA or submit the EA for approval. If the board decides on that or approves, that's up to the board.
I like that course of action, if I may. I think that it would be easy enough, or let's say certainly possible, to make our recommendation that items 1 and 2 move forward just as is, and then on item 3, say pending the submittal of an EA from the University of Hawaii. Our initial assessment is that the probable impact of an accidental release would be low. Just based on the data that had been provided.
Any objections to that?
If there are no objections, then I'm happy to put it in as a motion.
Mm-hmm. So and before we go, Sam, I appreciate that you're obviously, as I said, between the weekend, the well-deserved week. Are there any questions? Are there any questions to the proposed permit conditions? Do you guys have a chance to read these conditions? I mean, they are usually standard, but is there anything that you have a question for Chris or for the petitioner themselves?
I guess I would just like to double check. I've read through them and they seem reasonable to me. Has the applicant read through them? Because we did run into this in a previous submittal where the applicant actually hadn't read through all of them, and we had to revise some of them to keep the safeguard while making it workable for the project. So I guess my question would be to Mark, have you looked at all of these conditions, and do they appear to be workable from your point of view?
Yes, indeed, I've read them through. The one that, I mean, it obviously looks contradictory. It says that UH cannot participate in the work is what it appears contradictory. As I said previously, our interpretation was once the organism is established in the environment, we're free to work on it. I still believe that's true, although there might be, we will revisit that. However, all that said, once the whole EA process is complete, and we've discussed this with Chris and others, then that condition can be changed or removed. I don't know how that would work exactly. But yeah, all the other conditions are perfectly good. We've responded to various questions about the conditions in responses to questions Chris sent us, and I believe we're able to accommodate them all, if I'm not mistaken, Chris. Yep.
No, Mark, you're correct. You know, some of the, like, in particular, permit condition number 5 was based on, you know, not having a FONSI or an exemption in place. You know, should you guys go through the environmental review process, get your state FONSI or an exemption, permit condition number 5, I mean, we can just eliminate that. Because you guys would be free to use state resources, funding, land, that sort of thing. And the same was true with permit condition number 4. You know, if you had the FONSI or the exemption, you know, I put that permit condition in there to allow you guys to be able to take Vimasticus out of quarantine and, you know, store it at your guys, you know, one of your facilities or labs. So it would be easier to release, especially given its, you know, very short adult lifespan. But those conditions are, you know, basically contingent upon getting a FONSI or an exemption.
Yeah, understood. And at this, I mean, we have no intention of actually doing that. You know, Peter and company would handle all the quarantine and release. But anyway, yeah, we understand.
So what, I mean, sorry, Mark, but does that mean that you guys would be applying for, you know, going through the environmental review process with the state, you know, and trying to pursue a FONSI or an exemption?
I'm perfectly
in
prepared
order to do this work.
So. If you know, in order to make this whole process streamlined and so on, and just make everyone happy about it, it seems like the obvious thing to do, and I'm perfectly prepared to do it. I've been getting stuff in line to submit anyway. I mean, we tried a while ago and it didn't seem necessary, right? But we'll happily do it. Yeah, you know, I mean, honestly, it seems logical to me that we should do it, right? I mean, surely there should be the impact assessment at the state level. I don't know, there cannot be. The one we submitted to the feds is super comprehensive, sure, and that would be the core of what we'll submit for the state one.
Thanks for pointing that out, Mark, and thanks for stating that you're willing to do so and intend to do so, because that would seem the path of least resistance.
Agreed.
So, Mark, this is Helmut again. I have a question. I mean, obviously you looked at the condition here. I just want to make sure, as you know, because we always had that same question because of the issue with port of entry, and I know Chris is gonna he's heard that before, but I want to make sure that this is clear that port of entry is Honolulu. It gets inspected here by my plant inspectors, plant quarantine inspectors, and then it goes straight back to the Big Island, to Volcano, to the quarantine facility. Is that, I mean, does that provide any issues, or is that fine?
Yeah, I believe that's fine. I mean, that's obviously Peter's side of it, but my understanding is that's perfectly acceptable, yes, and workable.
Yeah, because again, and this is, we had, you know, the discussion about the line between use of state resources or whatever it is, you know, who's gonna pick it up here at Honolulu? If you're here in Honolulu or some of the UH person, Tom, right? The line is already crossed. I mean, this is the whole point of being.
Absolutely. No, Peter would be picking it up. No.
Yeah. So, and that's the whole point. I mean, we want to avoid the issue that there's no concern, there's no complaint, there's nothing. We want to make that as straightforward as possible. Chris, you had comment?
No, I mean, I just wanted to clarify that, you know, it wouldn't, you know, it's not the case of it having to come from Hilo just to Oahu to be inspected and then being shipped back to Hilo for release. That's not what we're talking about here. It's just basically when it first comes in from Colombia into Hawaii, the first port of entry would be Honolulu, where it would be inspected before it gets moved to the Big Island.
Yes, understood.
Perfect. Mark, since we have it, do you have any questions for us at the moment, or?
No, not really. I mean, maybe it's not the place for it. I'm just curious about what people thought about certain of the questions, but if there are not any major concerns about that, then that's all good and well. Don't worry about that.
I had a couple of nuts and bolts question. Mark, I thought the information provided was really helpful, and it looks like you've done a really solid job with backing this up with the studies, and the breadth of the non-target testing was great, including, you know, 6 native scelidids. I was really happy with all of that. I just had a kind of nuts and bolts question about how it's going to be used in the field by farmers. Is this, because it didn't really talk so much about how it's used in places where it's been released, is it going to require regular augmentative releases, like seasonal releases? Or is the hope that once it's really established, they will be able to rely on either wild reservoirs or whatever for good control for coffee plantations?
Yeah, fair question. So in the beginning, the initial thought was to propose this as an augmentative agent that the ARS would rear in like portable quarantine facilities or mass production facilities rather. We shifted away from that. Our expectation is that it will become established. We have feral coffee and we have unmanaged coffee all over that provide reservoirs of CBD, of hypothalamus as hosts, which could facilitate establishment. This insect, it persists with very low densities of Hypothalamus hampii in Kenya, where it's originally from, and appears to suppress it efficiently. The point being that it persists with low densities of coffee berry borer. I mean, we have high densities. We might have some discussion between Peter and myself, but my expectation is that it will establish and be a typical classical biocontrol agent, and you won't have to actually do anything to use it except restrict pesticide application to conserve the insects in the environment once it's established. Yeah, augmentation comes with a whole lot of issues, right? Like production costs and so forth, and timing of releases. So does that answer your question, Rob?
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Sorry, Mark, that you got all the brunt of the questions here and have to fend it by yourself.
That's okay.
I'd appreciate it. Any other questions?
If not, then my motion stands.
All right, then Sam, for the records, can you repeat your motion?
Oh my gosh, you're asking me to repeat my motion. With regard to item 4 on the agenda, review by the committee, I move to one, allow the to advise to allow the importation and possession of lab-reared strains of Phimastocus coffea. Number 2, establish permit conditions for the importation and field release of said parasitoid. And 3, given the information that was obtained during this meeting, our assessment is that the probable impact of the lab-reared strains, if accidentally released, would be very low.
All right. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Rob will second. Oh, sorry. Rob, second. We're in discussion. Do we have any comments, discussion from the public, Kevin or Jason? Any hands raised?
No one at the moment.
All right. Any comments, further comments, questions, discussions from our members?
Yeah,
I
I would
think
just like
that-
to.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
No. I
Okay.
think you're about to say the same thing as me.
So I'd just like to comment on the public testimony from, is it Chris Manfredi? I wasn't really sure what his suggestion about releasing on a other island was all about, but I guess I would recommend to Mark, as you move through the Chapter 343 process, to make sure that you're including a wide breadth of consultation with coffee growers on Hawaii Island. I know it's probably a really mixed group with lots of diversity, but that signaled to me that there might be coffee growers in Kona who are uncomfortable with this for some reason. And I think it's important to make sure that, they have the right information, from the EA when it gets published as a draft. And yeah, that's all I have.
And if I may, thank you, Rob, for that. I'm going to read that particular paragraph there. We suggest, that's Chris Manfredi in his testimony, that the initial release be made on a neighbor island with consent of growers there instead of in Kona, so further study may be advanced in a more controlled and isolated setting. That was what Rob was referring to. Okay. Any other, Sam, you had?
No, I was just going to point out that for the record that we had the discussion on the preparation of the EA, and that our assessment of the probable impact in number 3 was in review of the draft assessment, and with confidence that the final EA would cover those points and support our assertion that the likely probability of impact would be low.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, hearing none, let's go to the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Or raise
Aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Any opposing? Hearing none. Vote, motion carries.
Awesome.
All right. I don't see any other items on the agenda. Let me see. Did I miss anything?
Only the adjournment, I think.
Is that the last one, Sam? All righty. All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, but with the delightful observation that unlike the Board of Land and Natural Resources, a single agenda, or a 3-parted single agenda item is such a refreshing thing.
It certainly is, yeah. In particular on a Friday afternoon, right? But it's 2:45, so thank you for hanging in there. So who's gonna do a motion to adjourn?
I did. I
Oh,
moved.
Sam, who's second?
Second.
Second. Oh,
All right, Grace was first. Second, Grace, all in favor?
I,
Aye.
Aye. Well, motion carries. We adjourn. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. Have a great weekend.
We are ending at
Thank you.
2:46 on Friday afternoon, 10:28. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you for
Chris.
your work. Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Chris. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Mahalo. Aloha.
You too.
Mahalo.
Aloha.
Aloha.